The old Ursuline Convent, 3 centuries of spirits in New Orleans, in the oldest building in the Mississippi Valley. The nuns who prayed for 300 years have never left their chapel. Long before Bourbon Street became synonymous with indulgence, before Jackson Square filled with artists and fortune tellers, before the French Quarter became the beating heart of tourist New Orleans, there stood a building on Chartres Street that would outlast every structure around it. The old Ursuline Convent at 1100 Chartres Street rises from the French Quarter landscape not as monument, but as active participant, the oldest surviving building in New Orleans, the oldest building in the entire Mississippi Valley, a structure completed in 1752 that has never stopped serving, never stopped functioning, never stopped holding within its walls the accumulated presence of 300 years of continuous human occupation. The Ursuline nuns arrive in New Orleans in 1727, the first community of religious women in what will become the United States. They come from France with a mission to educate, to heal, to establish the spiritual infrastructure of a colonial outpost that desperately needs structure of any kind. The wooden convent they initially occupy on this site proves insufficient for the ambitions of both the nuns and the growing city around them. By 1745, construction begins on the brick building that will replace it, a structure designed to last, to anchor, to provide the physical foundation for the spiritual work the nuns have committed to performing in perpetuity. The building they create serves this purpose magnificently. For nearly a century, it functions as convent and school, the center of Catholic education for girls in colonial and early American New Orleans. The nuns teach inside its walls, they pray in its chapel, they tend the sick in its rooms, they maintain gardens on its grounds. The building absorbs this devotion the way brick absorbs moisture, slowly, thoroughly, until the prayers themselves become part of the structure's composition. When the institutional needs of the growing city shift, the building shifts with them. It serves as military hospital during the War of 1812, during the Civil War, during conflicts that bring wounded and dying soldiers through its doors in numbers the nuns never anticipated when they designed their school. It serves as governor's mansion when Louisiana needs temporary housing for its executive authority. It serves as archbishop's residence when the church requires space for its highest local official. Through every transformation, the building maintains its essential character as place of service, place of prayer, place where the boundaries between institutional function and sacred purpose dissolve into a single continuous practice. By the 20th century, when the building transitions into its current role as museum and archive administered by the Archdiocese of New Orleans, it has accumulated within its walls the full range of what a building experiences across 3 centuries of uninterrupted occupation. The prayers of hundreds of nuns across multiple generations, the suffering of soldiers who perished from wounds and disease in its rooms during wartime, the education of thousands of young women who passed through its classrooms, the administrative weight of political and ecclesiastical power conducted within its chambers. Everything that happens in a building that stands at the center of a city's life for 300 years remains in the building, layered into its floors and walls like geological strata. The museum staff who work in the building today document what those layers contain. In the chapel, the most sacred space within the convent, the most sustained location of prayer across the building's entire history, the presence of the Ursuline nuns manifests with remarkable consistency. Staff members arriving for early morning setup report figures in habit kneeling in the pews, figures that vanish when approached but leave behind the unmistakable atmosphere of devotion, of concentrated spiritual attention that the chapel has contained since its consecration. The sound of prayers in Latin emerges from the chapel when the room is empty, audible from the hallway outside, ceasing immediately when the door opens to reveal the vacant space within. These are not dramatic manifestations. They do not announce themselves with violence or spectacle. They continue the work the nuns performed for centuries in this exact location, the work of prayer that defined the building's purpose and still defines its spiritual character. The staff who encounter these presences describe not fear but recognition, the sense of meeting something that belongs in the space more completely than any living occupant possibly could. The garden presents a different presence entirely. Multiple staff members, working independently without prior discussion of paranormal experiences, report encounters with a male figure on the convent grounds. The figure appears solid, fully present, indistinguishable from a living person until it vanishes. Unlike the praying nuns whose identity and purpose connect directly to the building's documented history, this figure remains unidentified. The staff who encounter him describe him as non-threatening, as belonging to the space in some capacity they cannot articulate but can feel with certainty. The garden, like the chapel, maintains its own population, its own accumulated presence from centuries of cultivation and use. The third floor carries a different quality altogether. Where the chapel resonates with prayer and the garden hosts its mysterious visitor, the third floor maintains a silence that the building's otherwise comprehensive paranormal activity makes conspicuous rather than comforting. This is the floor connected to the Casket Girls legend, the floor where certain rooms remain sealed, the floor that the convent's institutional administrators decline to discuss in any detail that would satisfy paranormal curiosity. The silence itself becomes a form of documentation. In a building where the nuns still pray and the garden still hosts its unidentified presence, where 300 years of occupation has created multiple layers of paranormal activity across its accessible spaces, the third floor's sealed rooms represent not absence but containment. What requires containment in a building this thoroughly consecrated, this continuously occupied by religious practice, this saturated with 3 centuries of prayer, becomes the question the building does not answer. The Archdiocese of New Orleans has not commissioned formal paranormal investigation of the old Ursuline Convent. The building functions as museum and archive, and its administrators maintain institutional priorities that do not include paranormal validation of staff experiences or researcher speculation about sealed rooms. The documentation that exists comes from the staff themselves, accounts collected informally across decades of employment, reports that accumulate the same way the building's presence accumulates, through slow accretion of consistent experience. Paranormal researchers who investigate the accessible portions of the building as part of broader French Quarter studies encounter the same phenomena the staff reports. The praying nuns in the chapel, the unidentified man in the garden, the specific atmospheric qualities that distinguish rooms from one another based not on architectural features, but on what has happened within them across 3 centuries. The building offers its evidence to anyone who spends time within its walls, but it does so on its own terms, through its own accumulated presence, rather than through the validation mechanisms researchers typically seek. The danger at the old Ursuline Convent is not the danger of a single malevolent entity or a dramatic haunting that escalates toward violence. The danger is the layered complexity of a building with multiple paranormal populations occupying the same structure across different floors and different functional areas. The praying nuns in the chapel represent one population, peaceful and devoted, continuing in death the spiritual practice that defined their lives. The military hospital deaths during multiple conflicts created another population, soldiers who perished from wounds and disease in rooms that were supposed to heal them. The third floor holds whatever the Casket Girls brought with them, whatever requires the specific kind of silence and sealed doors that suggest institutional awareness of something that cannot be safely acknowledged. These populations coexist within the building because the building has never stopped functioning as sacred space. The prayers continue in the chapel, masses continue in the adjacent church. The consecrated purpose that defined the convent's original mission continues to operate through its current institutional life. This ongoing spiritual practice does not remove the paranormal presence the building contains. It manages it, It maintains the boundaries between populations. It provides the framework within which 3 centuries of accumulated human presence can coexist without conflict. Nothing at the old Ursuline Convent has been removed or exorcised or driven out through ritual intervention. The building has been in continuous operation for nearly 3 centuries, and its paranormal population has been in continuous residence for the same period. The institution that administers the building considers this the appropriate outcome. The nuns who devoted their lives to prayer in the chapel have earned the right to continue praying there. The building that housed them honors this devotion by allowing their presence to remain. The sealed 3rd floor stays sealed. The garden keeps its mysterious visitor. The building holds everything it has accumulated across 300 years with the specific composure of a place that has been praying since before the United States existed and has no particular anxiety about what 3 centuries of prayer inevitably contains. The old Ursuline Convent stands today at 1100 Chartres Street, as it has stood since 1752, the oldest building in the Mississippi Valley, the spiritual foundation of Catholic New Orleans. The structure that housed the first community of religious women in the country and educated generations of daughters, and served as hospital and mansion and residence, and now serves as museum and archive. Visitors walk through its rooms, admiring the architecture and the historical artifacts. Staff members work in its offices and galleries, knowing that the building contains presences they encounter regularly and have learned to accept as permanent residents. The praying nuns continue their devotions in the chapel. The garden maintains its population. The 3rd floor keeps its secrets. The building does not advertise its paranormal activity. It does not require validation from investigators or recognition from researchers. It simply continues as it has always continued, holding within its walls everything that 3 centuries of continuous sacred occupation inevitably creates. The prayers that still echo in the chapel are prayers that have been said in that exact space for nearly 300 years. The presence that saturates the building is the presence of every nun who prayed there, every soldier who perished there, every person who passed through its doors across generations of institutional service. The building remembers all of it. The building contains all of it. And the building, through its ongoing consecrated purpose, manages to hold all of it together without the catastrophic failure that a structure less thoroughly grounded in spiritual practice might experience. On Chartres Street, in the French Quarter, the oldest building in the Mississippi Valley continues its 300-year conversation with the city around it. The tourists pass by on their way to more dramatic destinations. The nuns pray in the chapel. The garden hosts its visitor. The 3rd floor maintains its silence. And the old Ursuline Convent, with the patience of something that has outlasted everything built around it, simply continues to stand. If you found this case compelling, subscribe to Vanishing Roads for more documented paranormal investigations from around the world. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented case files. All events reference real investigations and reported incidents.